Welcome back to Alchemical Astrology. If you're new here, I'm Melusine, your YouTube psychopomp, helping you navigate the liminal spaces through ancient teachings. I approach astrology the same way I approach my counseling practice. Before I publish anything on this channel, I ask myself, what would be of greatest value to the viewer at this moment? As a mental health practitioner, what I have seen escalate at an alarming rate is a pervasive sense of unease that can rapidly swing into despair or hostility. How does this relate to astrology? Well, as it happens, most astrologers in ancient times were also physicians. They associated various conditions with planetary signatures. Mars and Saturn are the malefic twins, and aggression and depression fall into their camps. When specific transits hit your natal chart to form challenging aspects, then you're more likely to respond to the environment within that emotional spectrum, especially if you don't have a full view of the dynamics at play. Consequently, the physical symptoms that accompany them could manifest if you don't address the energies effectively. How does one do that? Imagine, if you will, that our solar system is a massive gearbox in the sky. My father was fascinated by clocks as a boy and took one apart so he could see what was going on inside. Picture that on a much larger scale. This is what the Mayans did best, and they had multiple calendars to measure recurring cycles. By precisely calculating these celestial gear shifts, they were able to anticipate changes at the mundane level and prepare for them appropriately, especially if they presented hard angles. Taking this down to a personal scale, if you know you're in a Saturn return, for example, or transiting Pluto is making a conjunction, square, or opposition to one of your natal hotspots, then you can surf the wave from a proactive versus a reactive perspective, knowing that this too shall pass. In effect, you're less likely to be blindsided and can therefore respond to events more constructively, no matter how difficult they appear to be. I also align with the ancient principle applied in medical astrology that our bodies mirror these planetary archetypes in physical form. There are positive attributes to each, but an imbalance that remains unchecked can lead to maladies that require remediation. In the case of plant medicine, for example, if you have, let's say, a predominantly choleric temperament, hot and dry, then you would demonstrate fiery traits, driven, ambitious, always on the go. When harnessed properly, this can lead to great productivity and growth. However, if the fire is left to combust without direction or purpose, then you can experience burnout in the form of adrenal fatigue or gastric disorders. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you could suffer from chronic inflammation or find yourself overcome by fits of rage, lashing out uncontrollably in an instant at the slightest provocation. Fire can purify, and it can destroy. What would be the remedy for this constellation of symptoms? As any Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine practitioner would confirm, balance is achieved by introducing something cool and moist to counter and soothe the dry heat. Every element, when excessive in a person's biofields, can lead to a physical response serving as a warning sign that the harmonics are out of whack. It's important to note that there's always an emotional component to be identified and healed if a lasting result is to be achieved. There are often clues in the natal chart that may point to the source of these woundings as well. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung looked at his patients' natal charts as part of his diagnostic toolkit and found that this greatly enhanced his capacity to liberate his clients from old traumas that lingered in the subconscious mind, dictating their actions in unhealthy ways and debilitating them to a point where they could no longer function in society. From a Jungian standpoint, we have what is called a collective unconscious, which is common to all of humanity. Memories and impulses that are not in our awareness dwell here and can be understood via pattern analysis and symbolism. That is what the unconscious communicates. Ultimately, the goal is integration of the shadow and archetypes. Whenever a massive paradigm shift comes into play, marking the end of an era, there's always a fallout that precedes it. The individual passing through this transformation is said to be going through their dark night of the soul. That being said, I believe the way we can identify our current movement out of the Piscean to the Aquarian age is by recognizing that the entire collective is now undergoing that same death and rebirth phase. You don't have to be an astrologer to understand that we are bearing witness to the collapse of entire systems and structures on which we have relied, which served as a foundation for societal norms and codes of behavior. Church and state, the two opposite pillars that have supported belief systems over centuries, are undergoing what alchemists would categorize as the negredo phase. I'd venture to say that would give anyone a good reason to feel uneasy. What it all boils down to is how well you handle change. If there is a predominance of earth in your chart, then you're likely to dig in your heels and push back against the unfamiliar. Presently, all of our comfort levels have been challenged, and this will continue. Aquarius demands innovation and out-of-the-box thinking. The sooner we embrace this, the sooner we can get on with creating a new reality that reflects an evolutionary upgrade that may well have been triggered by the great Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on winter solstice of 2020. This began a new cycle of the greater benefic and malefic clashing in air signs for the next 200 years. Remember, Kronos, Saturn, was a Titan who castrated his father, Uranus, with a sickle, thereby claiming sovereignty over the world. He then proceeded to swallow his own children to avoid the same fate. But as destiny would have it, Zeus, Jupiter, his son, was hidden away until he matured enough to challenge his father. Zeus won the day, first forcing Kronos to regurgitate his brothers and sisters, and then banishing all the Titans to Tartarus. Thus began the reign of the Olympians. Make note that Jupiter will be squaring Saturn on August 19th. So tensions will really crescendo between the powers that be and the wannabes on the terrestrial stage. While the political jockeying for position plays itself out, the universe is asking you to step up your game and reinvent yourself on the basis of a more authentic identity. In so doing, you will catalyze the same outcome to your immediate surroundings. This is where I would recommend you focus your attention as a creator in your own right. So, how do we alchemically convert the internal lead represented by Saturn into gold represented by the sun? There are many paths leading to that state of enlightenment, but in the Aquarian age, it won't necessarily materialize through a messianic template. That's a Pisces thing. Aquarius is the sign of the people, so it's up to each and every one of us to take responsibility for our own well-being and channel the divinity within. I call this cohesive individuation. You build community without losing sight of your unique gifts and capabilities. If you've ever watched the film Inception, then you'll recall a scene in which the matrix the characters are standing in begins to fall away like a collapsing mosaic. Pretty much where we're at right now. When you bear witness to an epic reconfiguration of your reality, where do you find something stable to weave a safety net that bridges the dimensional gap? Enter the planet Venus. Unlike Mars, whose orbit is erratic and repeatedly out of bounds, Venus is as constant as she is bright. This is how she travels around the sun from a geocentric point of view. She carves a 5-petaled path in the sky over 8 years, always, without fail. Each petal takes about 18 months to complete, a literal golden ratio on which all of creation is based. This is the divine feminine in all her glory, nature in living action. Instead of cutting and dividing, she brings together and harmonizes flow. As Plato put it, beauty resides in proper measure and proper size of parts that fit harmoniously into a seamless whole. Pursuit of beauty is the highest form of truth. If we are to transcend the dismantling of the old, following Venus's starry guideposts should keep us on track and resilient to distractions that polarize us. So what is she showing us in her current 5-fold unveiling? Firstly, it's important to note that Venus has 3 faces. As morning star, she is the dawn bringer and presents her warrior persona. As evening star, she is magnetic and sensuous, the lover, not the fighter. Last, but definitely not least, she dives into the underworld and is hidden from view. It is in this stage that she resets her archetypal energy. In Sumerian mythology, this is described in the poem Descent of Inanna. Now, if you're curious to know which Venus was present on the day you were born, you can easily determine this by looking to see where she is in relation to the sun. If she's clockwise relative to the sun, then you have a morning star Venus. Counterclockwise is an evening star Venus. When she is in the sun's rays, either exactly opposite the sun or between the earth and the sun, she is in the underworld. On August 13th of 2023, Venus began a new cycle in the sign of Leo as morning star. She dropped out of sight end of April this year and emerged as evening star on July 9th, again in the sign of Leo. This is a notable energetic shift. Leo is ruled by the sun and is the place of the heart. You would assume Venus in Leo would be all about the spotlight, drawing attention to herself wherever possible, larger than life. But that's not how an evening star Venus walks through the world. She stands in her power quietly, fully aware that she can draw towards her whatever her heart desires without lifting a finger. She doesn't roar, she purrs. So what is the message here? Plain and simple. Calmly navigate your situation from a dignified, heart-centered place of sovereignty. Easier said than done, I know. How are you expected to accomplish that with so much drama coming at you from all sides, especially now that Mercury is making its retrograde motion out of his rulership in Virgo back into the sign of Leo from the 15th of August and will be in Leo till September 29th? Mayhem in the mercurial arenas of commerce and communication can rattle anyone's cage, no matter how serene they appear on the outside. Here's where I'd like to introduce you to the vagus nerve. This is the longest cranial nerve in our bodies that regulates several organ functions and involuntary sensory motor activities as it travels from the brainstem to the lower intestine. It's directly responsible for the effective operation of the parasympathetic nervous system, what I like to refer to as grazing mode. In contrast, the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight mechanism. Over the last 4 years, most people have had their adrenals on overdrive, being bombarded with potential catastrophic scenarios on a daily basis. We've been locked into the sympathetic gear and need to reset it. There are several ways to accomplish this yourself, and I've put a link in the description for your reference. If you want to return to a place of balance, you need to give the brain a clear signal that it is not Armageddon, and it's okay to take a moment to regain composure so the vagus nerve can perform its job properly. In other words, shut off the electrical chatter and get grounded by opening the magnetic channels. More simply yet, get out of your head and drop into your heart. It's not by chance religious icons were depicted like this. The clue has always been hidden in plain sight. This is where the alchemy happens. If you want to rise above the lead of the mundane, then the heart is the way to get to the gold. Venus has made that perfectly clear to us all. Those of you who have taken my online DIY plant first aid course are familiar with the doctrine of signatures. For those interested, there's a link below. If you were to cut an apple crosswise, you will see a pentagram in the center. This is why astrologers of old classified the apple as a Venusian plant. This is an example of the doctrine of signatures, a five-fold orbit reflected in the fruit of a plant. The wild rose is another obvious example. All Venusian plants possess cooling and soothing properties. To reset the vagus nerve, a Venusian plant can be utilized for that purpose. Spray rose water on your pulse points. To support the heart, add a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar with mother into a glass of water and drink it in the morning. Have a cup of mint tea when you're feeling anxious or queasy. Another point to take into consideration is the fact that Earth has currently moved into an area of space that is dense with concentrated plasma. Our sun is projecting massive quantities of plasma in our direction based on sunspot activity. In some circles, plasma is considered the connective force of the cosmos. And if we clear ourselves of heavy energy, we are fully capable of receiving the frequencies contained in these ejections, enabling us to wake up latent powers and dormant DNA. If we can find the courage to let go of what no longer serves and make room for a new reality. Perhaps paradise lost can be paradise regained. It is certainly something I've set my heart and mind to accomplishing. I'll close off with an anecdote that has never left me since I heard it, and now might be the perfect time to share it. During the war in Bosnia in the mid-90s, a woman who was a cellist with the symphony in Sarajevo stepped into the central square and began playing her cello. People fleeing in panic shouted, "Are you crazy? There are bombs overhead. How could you think of making music in the middle of a war?" Her response was, "How dare they drop bombs while I make music?"